1. Growing up, I had lived in the same house until I turned 18 and moved out on my own. And for my 18 years, my family and I have experienced some strange things that we don't know how to explain outside of ghosts. I remember having my imaginary friend, a little girl who followed me around the house. And I had always seen her as imaginary, until my siblings would tell me stories. My brothers had lived downstairs in the basement up until I was 7, and they had moved out. And there would be times during the summer, when we were all out of school, when my parents would take me out with them and leave a note for my brothers letting them know we would be back and letting them sleep in. But they would always be woken up by sounds of running and giggling from upstairs and would think I was awake and playing. By the time they dragged themselves upstairs, they would find that no one was home. My sister had moved in with us after she gave birth to her little girl, taking the now empty basement as her room, and told me about how there was a time she thought my parents left me home on a school day and just forgot to tell her, and came upstairs to tell me that if I wanted her to come upstairs and keep me company, she would. She noticed no one was home, but knew she heard that same running and giggling, and this time there was a ball in the middle of the floor. She shrugged it off and put the ball back in my bedroom, closing the door behind her before she went back downstairs to wake up my niece for breakfast. When she had come back upstairs, the ball was back in the middle of the room and my door was wide open. There was another spirit I knew of in the house, who I had called Creepy Dude since a young age. I gave him that name because he was only in the basement, and any time I went down I felt an uneasy feeling, as if someone was watching me or even standing behind me as I did laundry. There was a time I had gone downstairs to do laundry of a night. When my brothers had lived there, they had said that one night they woke up in the middle of the night to see a shadow in their doorway. The only thing visible were the dark boots it wore. One of my most vivid memories of something I can't explain happened one random night I was in my parents' room, telling them good night, when we heard a loud thud from the living room. My dad jumped up, told my mom and I to stay there, and went to find out what happened. My dad has never been a believer and would always just shake his head when Mom and I would talk about the house being haunted. But even this stumped him. On the wall in the living room was a candle holder, mounted just above the edge of the couch, and it held a little decorative candle. The candle wasn't round and was actually in the shape of a flower, so no way it could just easily roll around by itself. When my dad went to look around, he found that the candle wasn't there anymore, but the holder was perfectly in place. It wasn't moved or tilted and was still firmly mounted to the wall. He ended up finding that the candle had made its way through the living room, through the kitchen and dining area, and was sitting right between the door to the backyard and the door leading to the basement. 2. I have seen things that I can't explain ever since I was young, but usually I find a way to explain it away. I am not a scared person. I am not afraid of the dark, and I love a good scary movie, with ghosts, not gore. This event happened to me in 1998. I was driving along a one-way street that has 3 lanes. I was driving in the middle lane. I came to a traffic light that was red. I was 3 cars back in the line. To my left and closer to the lights there is a sidewalk that parallels a driveway, and beside that, a little shopping plaza. I looked towards the plaza, and there, sitting on the back curb of the sidewalk, was a man. I looked curiously at him because he was dressed in a black suit, like a business suit, with a black tie. He was also wearing a black-rimmed hat, like a cowboy hat. And beside him was a black briefcase. It was about midday and a very hot and sunny day. I thought to myself, why is this man sitting there in the hot sun and dressed like that? And wondered if he was a street person or a beggar. But why does he have on a suit? He suddenly turned his head and looked straight into my eyes and kept a steady stare. I felt uncomfortable and uneasy, creeped out. I was far back in the traffic. Why would he be staring at me like that? I looked away and back, and he was still staring at me. The light changed to green, and as I was driving by, he kept his stare on me. I drove off quickly and went home, still thinking how weird that was, and how creepy he made me feel. I told my husband about this weird man, and he said, maybe he was waiting on someone. But why was he sitting there in the hot sun? Why not in the shade of a building? I asked. And I went on with my day, trying not to think about him. The next morning, my husband asked me to go to an electric shop to buy an item. When he told me where to buy it, I gasped. It was the same plaza I had saw the weird man. I told my husband that was the same place I saw the man in the suit, and if I went there and I saw him, I wouldn't go in. My husband said, don't go in if you don't feel comfortable, but for some reason I needed to go and satisfy myself that he was just a man and not some supernatural being or something, and that I was being silly. I arrived at the plaza and parked near to the door of the shop. The store was just opening, so very few cars were parked there. I was able to look all around. There was no one around, and I did not see the man anywhere. I breathed a sigh of relief and felt better to enter the shop. The shop entrance had 4 steps up to the door. I stopped at the top and had another look around. Still no one other than the traffic moving along. Inside was a long counter, sort of like a bank, with 4 windows to purchase items. I was the only customer. 2 windows were open beside each other, with a sales rep at each. Beside the reps were 2 other workers moving around. Everyone looked at me, and we all exchanged good mornings. I went to the last window on the right. The door to the shop is now behind me and to my left. I was more relaxed now. As I ordered what I needed, and the rep sent another worker for the items, and she collected the payment for them. As I waited, I turned to look at the entrance door, and there, coming up the steps, was that man wearing the same black suit. He had on his hat and the briefcase in hand. My heart nearly popped out of my chest. I felt the blood rush from my face. Where did he come from? How did he get there so fast, and why is he coming in here? He opened the door and slowly walked in. He walked towards me, staring at me. His eyes were dark, and I'm not sure if he was smiling or had no expression. I was just so frightened. He walked slowly over to the counter next to me and turned to face the window beside me. He had his head slightly down. The lady sitting at that window did not look up from what she was doing. He said nothing to her. He just stood there. As a matter of fact, no one even looked at him from behind the counter. I was frozen for that moment. I turned back to my cashier and used my peripheral vision to watch him. He just stood there facing the second lady. I wanted to ask if anyone else saw him, but I was so frightened and could not speak. It seemed like forever that I was standing there, but I am sure it was just a few seconds. The man then started to slowly turn his head towards me. I was just about to run out of the shop, leaving my items behind, when the cashier handed me my bag. I ran from the shop, looking behind me as I opened the door. He was slowly heading towards the door also. I ran down the steps and fumbled for my keys and got into my car as quickly as I could. I looked up at the shop door as he exited. He was still staring at me, with a grin. I drove off as fast as I could. I looked behind me as I drove away and saw him still watching me as he walked down the steps. I do not know who or what that was or what he wanted, but I am glad he did not get in my car. I felt like that's what he wanted, to come with me. I avoided driving on that road for a long time. I eventually drove past there with my husband, but never saw him again. I have not been to that shop or in that plaza again. It still gives me chills even to this day. 3. I have had many experiences that I cannot explain. Every house I've lived in, I've always experienced something, leading me to believe that something is following me or my family. Anyway, when I was in 1st and 2nd grade, my family and I lived in this huge old house. Whenever my parents had to work or go somewhere, my sister would be in charge of watching me. We liked to hang out in the living room and watch movies, so we would do just that. There were several times we would be watching a movie and would hear footsteps running back and forth in the hallway upstairs, or hear windows slamming shut. Whenever we would tell our parents, they would just tell us that the house is really old. Fast forward a few years later. We move into a new house, and weird things still happen. I was old enough to finally start being home alone after school, and one day I was sitting on the couch, and heard the radio just turn on and start blasting music. I also heard the toilet flush, so I noped out of there and ran to my friend's house. Even though I was freaked out, I told myself it could have just been a power surge and old plumbing, but thought it was weird that it happened simultaneously. Little things like that kept happening until I grew older and things got weirder. When I was around 13, I had a sleepover with my best friend. We were watching TV in my room with the lights off, and all of a sudden, the picture on the TV just fades out and my closet door slowly opened. We both just clutched each other and screamed until my parents came rushing into my room to see what was happening. By then, everything was back to normal, except for the closet door being open. When I was 15, I started waking up to the feeling of being slowly dragged off the bed. I would blame sleep paralysis, but as soon as I felt myself being dragged off the bed, I would turn over right away and try to ignore it to drift back to sleep. Also, during the day, my bed would shake with me in it. Things started getting weirder around my age now. My ex-girlfriend and I were laying in bed one day, and she was napping while I was playing a video game. I heard a demonic voice out of nowhere say something I couldn't understand. I was so shaken up. I had to wake my ex up, and she stayed up with me until I felt better. A month or two ago, I was playing with my cat. He likes to sit on top of the steps by the banister, where he is level with my head so he can pop out when I creep up my hand towards him. One night, I came home and was playing with him when I started feeling a presence behind me. You know when someone is sneaking up on you, but you can feel their presence. And I heard the floorboards creaking behind me, like someone was walking right behind me. My cat even stopped playing and followed it with his head, staring whatever it was down. That was the last straw, and I decided I would buy some sage the next day and do a cleanse. The next day I told my parents, who are the biggest skeptics. My dad responded by saying, "You're going to sage the house? I really think you should." And shared some of their experiences. After cleansing the house, I haven't really had any experiences that stuck out since then. 4. To provide some context, this took place about a year ago, more accurately October-November of last year, near my hometown, Michigan. For reference, I'm about an hour away from Detroit, a used-to-be small town that's become more densely populated over the last decade, with a lot more hustle and bustle. However, where I live, I'm at least 1 mile away in all directions from any commercial zones, or more modernized residential areas that tend to be a bit congested. It's one of the last stretches of slow old farm country in the town that hasn't been overrun with cookie-cutter subdivisions. My house was built in the 70s by my grandfather, with whom I still reside, along with my husband, daughter, and aunt. We are his caretakers. While we save up and finish school to afford our own home, there's a sizable lot or 3 of land between our house and our neighbors on either side. Might be worth mentioning that growing up, my friends always said my house looked like a house you'd see in a horror film, due to its setting amongst dense trees. Some of the trees have been cut down to prepare for more houses, but fortunately for us, the builders violated multiple codes. I guess. So now there's a bit of overgrown, expansive field. Anyway, I'm rambling, just an inherently descriptive person trying to paint as detailed of a landscape possible for anyone who might find it helpful. So it was an autumn Sunday evening, and the sun had been down for a bit. Most of the leaves had fallen by now, but I recall it being an unusually warm night for that time of year. Everyone in my house was winding down for the night and preparing for the work and school week. I'd say around 10:30, I decide to let my dogs out for one last time before turning in for the night. I go to open the back door, which is a giant glass sliding door or wall window, and my dogs are right at my feet behind me, ready to bust out of the door as soon as it opens wide enough. I'm glad I didn't let them out, because I guarantee if they saw what I did briefly, they would have both charged towards it, and it would have just been bad news bears. I open the door, and where the edge of our yard ends and the brushy field begins, keep in mind this brush is a bit taller than I am. I'm 5 feet tall exactly. A pale greyish figure is standing amidst the brush at the end of the yard. The only reason I had noticed it in the first place was because the noise my door made seemed to have startled it. so it made noise in the dry fallen leaves, which caused me to direct my attention towards this noise, which is when I saw it fleetingly duck down and take off further into the field behind my house. It's difficult to describe, but due to what I saw, being familiar with coyotes, feral cats, and other animals I'm used to seeing around the property, it had remarkably human characteristics, given its height and how it crouched over before moving in bound-like strides into the field. That's another thing I noticed, was that it didn't make the sound of what a human would, or any animal that is native to this area for that matter would make in retreat. The pace wasn't quick, multiple steps like a human, deer, or coyote. They were like lengthy, bounding strides, and the sound it made hitting the ground had weight to it. The tread was not light. I guess what I'm trying to say is it sounded big. It kind of took my breath away, and I was left startled myself, but due to what I did see, believing what I saw to bear resemblance to a human, I sheepishly call out, "Hello? Is someone there?" I'm still standing in my doorway, kind of frozen in mild fear. I yell again, "Hello?" This time a bit more confident and enunciated. This captures the attention of my husband and my aunt. My husband comes downstairs to see why I was yelling outside, as did my aunt. I explained to both of them kind of frantically what I just witnessed. My aunt was spooked, and my husband went upstairs to get a flashlight and his air rifle. I'm an animal lover and don't like the idea of him shooting any animals, even problem animals, with something that can do serious damage, like a real gun, so he uses an air rifle. But it can still wound and kill small game like a raccoon. My husband and I both go outside into the backyard. Him with the rifle and light, we begin scanning a pitch-black overgrown field to no avail at first. Maybe after 5 minutes of looking, my husband hops on top of his sedan that's parked outside to get a better view of the field, or any movement through the brush, and continues looking. His gaze stops in one particular direction, though. He hops down and quietly approaches me in the yard and points into the direction of what he was looking at. About 20 yards into the field, in the direction closer toward the back of my neighbor's property, there are two glowing orange eyes looking right at us through the brush, somewhat low to the ground. When he gets me to see what he's seeing, he decides to shoot in the general direction of this thing to maybe startle it a bit, to see how it moves. He did this several times and it didn't flinch. He then decided he would try to aim his fire directly at it to get a reaction, and he's a damn good shot. He hits it in what I imagined to be the face, and it sort of jumps up, and when it landed, it was a solid-sounding thud against the ground. All the while, it did not break its gaze on us. After hitting the ground, it moved further back into the field without running away, necessarily. It kept eye contact with us the entire time, almost as if walking backward, not once averting his gaze. It eventually moved far enough back that we both had to jump onto the car to still be able to see it. After several minutes of this, it had moved beyond our visual, so we hopped down and went inside. It's worth mentioning that there wasn't any sort of light that would cause reflective eyes, aside from the moon, which wasn't even full, and it was very dark. We purposefully kept our lights off, and the eyes looked as though they weren't even reflecting light, but more so emitting it. Do with this what you will, but I and my husband both know what we saw, and given the frequency and variety of animals we see normally otherwise, this was significantly different than what we see. We have deer, coyotes, foxes, possums, raccoons, skunks, and feral cats, all of which we are very familiar with. We have not seen anything like this prior to or since this time, although we do hear strange sounds and noises in the field and woods from time to time at night. My husband has actually woken me up in the middle of the night to listen to some strange moans and wailing, but that hasn't happened since earlier this year. I felt it was valuable to share in the sense that not all encounters are ones where whatever it is inherently malevolent or predatory, in torturous pursuit of humans. It was just an experience that struck me as particularly odd. And before anyone says anything, as I know the legend and folklore of this cryptid has Michigan origins, no, it was not Dogman. Unless Dogman has a human face, then slap the nickels out of my pockets and call me a liar. But George, it might be Dogman. 5. The story I'm about to tell may sound crazy, but it leaves me questioning in ghosts. To start off, I'm a 20-year-old male who was, at the time, living in the suburbs of Dacula, Georgia. At the time, I was staying with my older foster sister, and she and my other foster siblings would go out to different restaurants for fun events. I'm not the biggest people person, so when they would leave, I would stay at home, and they would come back to the house around 11 or 12 at night. Nilo is a small Yorkie dog who thinks he can take on anything. He would literally start barking at the front door and back doors constantly. It would mostly be in daytime or late evening, but this night something truly scary happened to me. I had to share a room with my older foster brother, who's the same age as me. But the room was built as a garage, and there's an entranceway that leads to the kitchen. And there's a food pantry closet where we'd store the canned goods and snacks. Now, I can't remember the exact time, but I think it was around 9 or 10 p.m. Nilo was in his little bed that sits in the living room across from the kitchen. Now, like I said, Nilo is the type of dog that barks at anything. So when I heard him for the first time, I came out of my room and stared him down. He always looks like he's so innocent, which I found cute. But after I went in my room again and heard his barking again, I began to get annoyed. He's probably around 10 at this time, and I didn't know why Nilo was barking. I was always glad to stay home alone just because I have more free time to do whatever I wanted. But for some reason, going out the second time and standing in the complete quiet, I felt as if I was being watched, and become more uncomfortable than before. At this point, I was fed up with Nilo's constant barking, so when I went out a final time, I felt something very strange happened. I could see Nilo was still right up in his bed, so when I went back in the garage, in a matter of seconds I became very uneasy, and goosebumps formed around my skin. What I saw when I turned around has scared me shitless. I was standing in front of the garage door, and I swear, I saw a person under a white sheet run across the door. It wasn't like a fast run, like a steady jog. I know it sounds almost laughable, but trust me, you wouldn't be laughing if you'd seen this, whatever it was. At that moment, my blood ran cold, and I stood there quiet. I didn't want to move, and it took me a few seconds to snap myself out of it. I ran to see Nilo, who looked like he was sleeping. I don't know how he couldn't feel or notice what was going on, because he's done so multiple times before. Now, I'm not a believer in the paranormal, but I question if what I saw that night was a spirit. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Paranormal Stories, episode 169. Behave yourselves. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video, and sent in stories for use in this video. Okay, let's see, a little bit of a shout out to give. Shout out to the author of the final story there, Sam the Panda, 98. Thank you very much, Sam the Panda. Okay, now I'm essentially in full swing on video production here, and I was planning on doing a stream this Saturday. I won't be able to now because I just don't have the time. Basically every day is make 2 videos, and so far it's going well. I don't want to jinx it, but so far it's going okay. But that does mean I won't be able to take any days off, so the next stream will likely be after, let's say the 21st. Right, not a guarantee, but let's say the 21st at the moment, because I should be done by the 20th if all goes according to plan. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.